The following program was paid for by the friends and partners of WLMB-TV 40 Toledo.
The first element is to have a meaningful purpose. Why are you in business at all? Or why does your ministry exist at all? What's the big why behind what you do?
Well, I want to welcome you to another episode of Main Street, the fastest half hour in television. I'm Dr. Jamey Schmitz. Of course, I'm joined by my co-host for the past 21 years, Virginia Bossa.
Well, Jamey, we have a great show. And so, if you're a leader or you're part of an organization, you don't want to miss today's show. Our guest has had over 30 years experience, and she's been like Vice President of Talent and Human Resources for Chick-fil-A. And so Deanne Turner, well, she discovered the secret sauce of selecting and retaining extraordinary talent while cultivating a remarkable organizational culture. So she's written this book called Bet on Talent, How to Create Remarkable Culture That Wins the Heart of the Customers. So welcome, Deanne. We're honored to have you here.
Oh, thank you so much. It's my pleasure to be with you.
Yes, and it's our pleasure to have you as well.
Absolutely.
Welcome, Deanne. Please share a little bit about yourself and what your role was at Chick-fil-A.
Sure. Well, I'm a Georgia native, and growing up in the Atlanta area, I became familiar with Chick-fil-A only as a customer. And then after my husband, who was a pastor in Ohio, we moved back to the Atlanta area, I began pursuing an opportunity at Chick-fil-A. My background had been in marketing, but I ended up in human resources. That's a long story in itself, but I ended up in that area of the business. And over the years, my responsibilities included all the selection of franchisees and the corporate staff, the management and development of those employees, learning and development culture, diversity and inclusion, and the list kind of goes on and on.
Yeah, 30 plus years, that's quite a career at Chick-fil-A. But up here in Northwest Ohio, Chick-fil-A has just been around for a few years, and but why do you think Chick-fil-A has been so successful, not only here in Northwest Ohio, but across the nation?
Well, actually, they've been in Ohio a long time. I'll tell you how long, because one of my early roles at Chick-fil-A is I was a recruiter for the operators or franchisees that lead the stores, and my market was the Northeast, and Ohio was included in that, and that was at least 25 or so years ago. So we've been around a while, but not as many on-the-street locations that you're familiar with now. And so the reason I think that Chick-fil-A is successful is simply this. A long time ago, the founder of Chick-fil-A, Truett Cathy, made a commitment about the most important decisions that you make in a business, and those are people decisions. And Truett always said people decisions are the most important decisions that a leader makes. And so Chick-fil-A inordinately invest in people decision making, and so they're very careful. The most important decision they make is who they give the keys to the restaurant to, and that's the Chick-fil-A franchisee or operator, as they're known. And so they have currently there's about 2,400 of those across the United States. They employ over 200,000 employees, and so I think the success came from a great model of selecting those franchisees, and then they've done an amazing job of selecting great people in their restaurants, and I think that's why people have such amazing experiences.
And while you had a large staff that helped support that whole selection process, at the end of the day, it was you saying, I choose this person to be a franchisee, to be an operator. That
was a big part of my role, and the most important question I would ask myself when I got to the end of that interview, and after somebody had been all the way through the process, I would ask them one final question. This is interesting what that question was. I'd look at them and I'd say, now why would I want my own children to work for you?
That's good.
Because if I didn't want my children to work for this person, why would anybody else want their children to? Over time, I really received some interesting answers to those questions, but it was my last final gut check about making the right decision of who to give those keys to the restaurant to.
And just, would you share what maybe the best answer was that you heard over all those times when you asked that question?
Sure. I treat your child like my child, and meaning that I'm going to invest in these people that work for me, whether young people or older people, because both work at Chick-fil-A, obviously, but I'm going to invest in my team, and I'm going to be the kind of leader that provides them with opportunities, not just to have a job, but to grow in that job and prepare them for future opportunities that they'll have beyond Chick-fil-A.
Well, I tell you what, I appreciate that, because I'm a mom of 4 children, and actually 3 of my 4 children work at Chick-fil-A.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so at the Perrysburg location here in Northwest Ohio.
And the 4th probably would.
Probably, you know, he's only 13, but he's looking forward to it. So, yeah.
But the other 3 do a great job, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, you know, you've written this book, Bet on Talent. You know, why did you write it?
Well, this started out, the original version of this book actually started out when I was 3-4 years ago. It was about the time that we lost our founder, Truett Cathy. And he had taught me so many things about the importance of people decisions and how, as I said, that the most important decisions a leader makes. And all the principles I learned about selecting people, I really learned from Truett. And so when he was close to we said graduating on to heaven, I began writing down these things that he had taught me for 2 reasons. One is I did not want those of us who worked in Chick-fil-A and had been taught these things from Truett to ever forget what he taught us. And then secondly, there would be so many people that would come after him that I'd want them to know what he thought was important in the business. So I just began writing all these things down, and before I knew it, I had a book. And so Bet on Talent is a little bit of a second version. The original book was It's My Pleasure, and now that's been expanded and new content in it and updated, and it'll come out as Bet on Talent in September.
Very good. Off camera, you were sharing a story with me that your career at Chick-fil-A started with a flat tire. Would you share that with our viewers?
I'll be happy to. So when my husband and I moved back to Atlanta, I was working briefly for an advertising firm, and it was on the other side of Atlanta. It wasn't very convenient. My husband had taken a church as a pastor, and it happened to be near Chick-fil-A, and he kept nudging me that I needed to get a job on the south side to make it more convenient. And he had been to lunch at the Chick-fil-A headquarters, which we now call the support center. He had been there a couple of times, and he said, this place has a magnificent culture. You really need to apply there. So I finally did apply, to make a long story short, and 2 weeks later I received a letter that said, we don't have a position that fits your background and interest. And so I told him, I said, well, that's that. I did what you asked, but I'm done. And he's not, no, I think you should apply again. So I applied again, and a couple weeks later, I got another version of the first letter telling me that they didn't have a position. And I was applying for positions in marketing because that was my background was in advertising. And so one day he was sitting in his church, and a lady came in, and she had a flat tire, and she asked to use the telephone. And he said, oh, no need to do that. I'll change the tire for you. And he went out and changed the tire. And when he was done, she gave him a Be Our Guest card for a free Chick-fil-A sandwich. He said, oh, do you work at Chick-fil-A? And she said, well, I do, but I'm leaving because my husband's been relocated. And he said, well, what department do you work in? And she said, advertising. And so he ushered her out of the church, and he called me. He said, they have a job availability in advertising, which I followed up on that point and eventually was hired. But I always like to say that my husband changed my life when he changed a tire.
Wonderful.
Well, that was certainly a God-ordained flat tire,
It felt
right?
like it, yes.
Well, you know, you say that Truett Cathy saw no contradiction between biblical principles and good business practices. You say that in the book. So what are some biblical principles that Truett Cathy built Chick-fil-A upon?
Sure. The first one that really jumps out at me, and it really has become in the last couple of decades to be a real focus of Chick-fil-A, but that's the idea of second mile service. And that's our the way we handle hospitality at Chick-fil-A. And you say, what is second mile service? Well, it's based on the biblical passage from Matthew 5:41 that says if you're required to carry a pack 1 mile, then carry it 2. And the scripture goes on to talk about working as unto the Lord instead of as unto man. And so Chick-fil-A began teaching that principle. The franchisees taught their team members that. And it started out with some simple things like, smile when the customer comes in and know their name and carry large orders to the table and refresh beverages at tableside, not refill drinks at the counter. Oh, and when somebody says thanks, say my pleasure. And that went on from there. And as as that principle was taught, well, the team members started outdoing themselves, and they were, jumping off dead car batteries in the parking lot and changing flat tires in the drive-thru and going dumpster diving for discarded dental appliances left on trays. And the list we could talk the rest of our time together about second mile service. So that was definitely a biblical principle. Another biblical principle is the Chick-fil-A's hospitality policy, to treat everybody with honor, dignity, and respect. And things like generosity, about tithing and being a steward of all that's been entrusted to you, and a positive influence on all who come in contact with Chick-fil-A. That's part of the corporate purpose. And so those are the kinds of principles that, they make good business sense. They're not just biblical principles, but they certainly make good business sense as well.
Your book is about how to create remarkable culture. What does that look like, and how would you contrast that between a biblical culture and a toxic culture?
A remarkable culture and a toxic culture, and I spent a lot of time in Bet on Talent, of course, talking about those things. And I had firsthand experience. I worked for a toxic culture before I came to Chick-fil-A.
Oh,
and yeah.
Do tell.
Oh, yeah.
The viewers would like to hear that.
Well, I knew the day when the FBI showed up that was not a good place to work. That was a good indicator. But yeah. So toxic cultures, one of the ways I describe them is they're full of rules. And toxic cultures often, people are operating completely on rules, where in remarkable cultures, people have been taught principles to apply and trusted to use their good judgment to do it. So let me contrast that. Not long ago, I was at a hotel property, and I checked in, and the first thing I asked that when I walk in, I always say, do you have my loyalty number? And Mr. Surly, as I nicknamed him, responded and said, I won't be needing that. Your host paid for your room, and so you won't be getting points for that.
Oh, my.
I know. And so it wasn't about the points, but it was what he missed by not asking me my loyalty number, because he didn't know if I was a first-time guest at that in their brand and that he should introduce me to the brand, or if I was one of those triple diamond platinum people that stay in their property every week and that he might want to thank me for my loyalty. He had no idea who his customer was. So how can you serve somebody and go the extra mile if you don't even know who the customer is? So that's an example of a toxic culture that's just so dictated by rules, and I found that as I went on into this as I stayed at this property, it was just one rule after another. But then you go into someplace else where it's principle run, and they're trying to find ways that outdo you. You heard my story about staying right here last night at the Hilton Garden Inn.
Yes, share that with us.
That would be an example. And so when I needed something, I approached the front desk, and I had forgotten my toothbrush. And Morgan at the front desk overheard me tell my host that I had forgotten my toothbrush. Well, he was trying to get me a toothbrush, and she just pulls one out of the drawer and puts it on the counter. She'd already anticipated my need. She didn't have to be asked. But then, I know you're going to think I'm the most forgetful person, but I also couldn't find my phone charger. And so when she called to ask me if the room was okay, I asked the question, well, it's great, but I can't find my phone charger. So the next thing I know, Morgan shows up with a phone charger for me.
Very nice.
Extra mile. So and that's a principle-based culture.
Yes.
She knew that the most important principle was to serve the guests. It didn't matter what the rules were.
Well, in your book, you talk about the elements of a remarkable culture. Could you explain those?
Sure, absolutely. The first element is to have a meaningful purpose. Why are you in business at all? Or why does your ministry exist at all? What's the big why behind what you do? The second element is a compelling mission. Something that really drives people, a challenging mission, a big goal that the organization can rally around and go after. The third is a set of demonstrated core values. So it's not just enough to decide what your values are, but they really must be demonstrated, starting first with leadership.
Well, that is a good word.
Absolutely. And you talk about defining your purpose, mission, core values, and guiding principles. What is the importance of these?
The biggest thing is it really dictates how you're going to behave as an organization. And so people know what's expected of them. And not only that, but to make it all come together and work, you select for those things. You develop in that area. You promote based on those. So everybody is united around that. They know which direction the organization is marching in. It creates a synergy of its own to help propel your organization forward.
Yeah, it's very important to have everybody pulling in the same direction.
That's right, absolutely.
All right. Well, Deanne, we are having a fascinating conversation, but we're going to talk more about, culture and the importance of it when we come back.
For Chick-fil-A in the time I was there, our biggest focus we were looking for people who were willing to serve, because Chick-fil-A is in the service business. So it really didn't matter if you were president of the company, or you were a franchisee, or you were an hourly team member. We all had the same purpose, and that was to serve others.
The mission of Dominion Broadcasting WLMB-TV 40 is to provide Christ-centered television of high technical quality and programming excellence to uplift, unite, educate, challenge, and encourage viewers in a manner consistent with the teachings of God's Word. Won't you join us? Please send your gift today and be a part of the ongoing mission of WLMB-TV 40. Thank you.
WLMB's free monthly program guide keeps you informed about your favorite Christ-centered and family-friendly programming found on WLMB. There's something for the whole family to enjoy, from great Bible teachers to classic family favorites. Plus, you'll find family movies, news from a Christian perspective, local shows Main Street and Pastor's Point, excellent don't-miss documentaries, and much more. Enjoy quality Christian television on WLMB-TV 40 and sign up for your free monthly program guide today.
Now, back to Main Street.
We are talking with speaker and author Deanne Turner. She's written her book, Bet on Talent, How to Create Remarkable Culture That Wins the Heart of the Customers. And so, Deanne, we are just excited. We're talking about the culture within business and organization.
Yeah. Deanne, I was wondering what happens when, despite your very best efforts, your corporate culture erodes instead of transforms people's lives?
Well, that's time to start over. And that's a very difficult thing when that happens. It's much easier when you begin an organization. That was one of the things that I was so fortunate when I worked at Chick-fil-A, because Truett, from the time he opened his first restaurant in 1946, the culture evolved, but he had those basics in place. And it's just much easier in that case than to have to, sometimes a new leader comes in and they have to start over. And I always go back to those main elements of your culture. So when you find yourself in that place, you go back to the why. The why is the most important thing. Why are we here? And then get everybody back on board. This is the why. This is why we do what we do. And then secondly, it's, okay, so if this is a why, what are we in business to do? Or what does our organization exist to do? Let's set a big goal we can rally around. And you really just go back to those basics and you repeat it. You either adjust your values or you recommit to those values, you demonstrate them, and you just have to start all over again and continue to be sure that all of your talent systems reflect those three things you've chosen.
There is a history of why Truett Cafe stayed closed on Sundays while other businesses were open 7 days a week.
Yeah.
What is that story?
Well, when Truett opened his first business in 1946, he was a young man. In fact, he lived right next door to the restaurant, so that if there was a problem in his 24-hour restaurant, the employees could run next door and tap on the window, and he could run over and see what he could do to resolve it. So his first Saturday night in business, he'd been open 6 days, 24 hours, and he looked around. He said, "I'm tired. These folks are tired too. We're taking tomorrow off." Of course, that wasn't such a big deal in 1946 because everything was closed, right? The very few businesses were open on a Sunday. But as he grew his business, his conviction about reserving the Lord's Day really became challenged. He had learned not only was it a personal value growing up as in the Southern Baptist faith and growing up in his family and what he was taught about reserving the Sabbath, but he also knew it was a good business practice. It gave his employees a day to be with their families, to rest, to worship if they chose to do so. And so he realized that that had been very beneficial, both because it served his personal belief, but it also served his employees well. So when he started going into the malls in the 1970s, the busiest day in malls was Sunday. And he got challenged sometimes. He would say, yeah, you can come here, but you'll have to open on Sunday. And he had to say no thanks. And then what happened, Chick-fil-A became very successful. And so in lots of occasions, Chick-fil-A did more business in 6 days than the others did in 7. And in some of those locations, Chick-fil-A did more business in 6 days than all the others did in 7 combined. Near the end of his life, Truett was often asked, Truett, do you regret having not opened your restaurants? I mean, have you ever thought about how much money you could have made had you chosen to be open on Sunday? And his response was always the same. He said, no, but I've often thought about how much money I would have lost had I chosen to open on Sunday.
He knew God's blessing was on him. Yeah. That's right. Well, how do you build a team that creates a remarkable culture?
Well, the first thing starts with selection, and you have to be very, very intentional. And so I talk a lot in Bet on Talent about the difference between hiring people and selecting talent. To me, hiring people is a quantity issue. Do I have enough? Do I have enough to cover the shift? It's all about enough versus when I think about selecting talent, I'm thinking about the quality of the people that I'm selecting. Do they have the character that matches the organization? Do they have the competency that matches the role? And do they have the chemistry that matches the team? Those are the 3 things that I'm looking for. So that's where you're going to start to build a team that creates a remarkable culture, is by selecting the talent that can deliver that for you. Right. Then you have to develop that talent, hold them accountable to those expectations.
So what kind of qualities are you looking for in people, so what advice would you give to leaders out there as they're looking?
Well, for Chick-fil-A in the time I was there, our biggest focus we were looking for people who were willing to serve, because Chick-fil-A is in the service business. So it really didn't matter if you were president of the company, or you were a franchisee, or you were an hourly team member. We all had the same purpose, and that was to serve others. Some were serving the customer, and some were serving those who served the customer, but we're all in the service business. So for us, that was the #1 requirement, is, are you here to serve?
And in your book, you talk a lot about servant leadership.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. And in the Chick-fil-A organization, the further up you move in the organization in a hierarchical way, the more you're expected to serve.
One of the phrases you use in your book is the phrase truth-telling. What do you mean by that?
Truth-telling. Well, I think there's, it's shifting the subject a little bit, but I think there's a real shortage of truth-tellers. And the way I talk about it in Bet on Talent is the need that is part of a stewardship of talent. You select the talent, well, then you have the responsibility of stewarding the talent. And one of the ways you steward talent is to give them the information that they need to improve their performance, to grow, to even move on to another opportunity if it's not the right opportunity. So in the book, I talk about how to tell the truth, about not mincing your words, but get to the point and tell people. Talk about impact instead of intent, because we don't know people's intent. We only know the impact that it's having on others, and help them understand that. And one of the things I talk about is when it's not going to work out. Whether I'm not going to select you for this job, or you're not going to get this promotion, or I'm sorry, there's not money in the budget for this. About how to be really direct and give people the information they need, and it's a much kinder thing to do. It's not, sometimes we try to be nice. You know what nice is? Nice is when we care too much about what you think of me. Kind is when I care more about you. And telling the truth is kindness.
In the long run, you're going to be much better off.
Right.
Absolutely. Right. In your book, you also talk about the abundance mentality and scarcity mentality, and how it impacts, the culture within the company. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. I learned this from a leader at Chick-fil-A who always really, he's very passionate. He was my leader for many years, Tim Tassopoulos, Chick-fil-A's president. And he always talked about, there's always enough. And having an abundance mentality means that you don't look at things like, oh, there's just that one position, so I'm in competition with my teammate. But recognizing that in a growing company, there's opportunity for everyone. And the idea is you want to get everybody in the right place. But constantly believing when you have a scarcity mentality, I'll give you an example. As a female leader in business, in a lot of businesses, when there's a minority representative, sometimes people get the idea, well, there's only one place. There's only one place at the table for a woman. There's only one place at the table for a person of color. And so that's a scarcity mentality when you start thinking that way instead of there's opportunity for everybody. And that when you have a scarcity mentality, you become competitive, and it really erodes the culture. But an abundancy mentality, when you believe that there's opportunity for everybody, helps your organization grow and people to reach those new levels.
Once a remarkable culture is established in a business, how should people engage their customers?
Well, I think it becomes almost natural, and that's certainly been the case of Chick-fil-A, is that, when you go in there and all of a sudden you're having experience. One of the things that's kind of a phenomenon at Chick-fil-A is that the customers sometimes are serving other customers. I don't know if you've ever had this experience, but there's an older man, and it's a long story. It's in the book, but I'll tell you the short version. Mr. John is a regular customer at a restaurant in Florida, and he even has a regular table and so forth there. You'll have to read the story. But the end of the story is kind of funny because Mr. John became such a fixture there that he began serving the customers. So on a rare cold day in Florida, people walk in, he'll bring his own hairdryer from home and warm their hands as an example, or I've been in Chick-fil-A's and I'm watching the customers clear other customers' trays from the table, and because it's such a service attitude and such an environment of generosity and caring for one another that it just becomes kind of natural that the customer gets engaged in it.
Yeah, it's like that love just spreads like wildfire.
Exactly.
Well, and speaking on that, how have you seen God use you, through your time at Chick-fil-A? I mean, over 30 years. So I'm sure you have many, many stories.
Well, I do. But I think the biggest thing that I think about, and that's such a humbling thing, to think of God using me, but early in my career, I had studied to go into full-time ministry, and then I married a pastor, and I thought that my path was going to be I'd work a few years, and then I'd stay at home and raise a family and be the preacher's wife. And God had other plans for my life, and that I developed this career, and so then it became to me something to steward. It was a gift to steward, and it became my calling. And so in terms of how I've seen him use me, I think the most important thing that I may have done is that he worked through me to help people get on the path he had determined for them. I was the instrument, whether it was to become a Chick-fil-A franchisee or a Chick-fil-A corporate employee, or to simply say, this isn't the right opportunity, but you know what I see in you? I think you should go and do this, or I think you should finish your education. And I think I was just that instrument that he used in some people's lives to do that.
How can people find out more about you, your books, and perhaps even have you come and speak?
Absolutely. My website is deanneturner.com, DEEANN Turner.com, and can reach out to me there. And people are surprised I actually answer my own email on that account. People are so surprised when I'm the one who responds. But and then also on Twitter at Deanne Turner, on Instagram at Deanne Turner, Facebook author page Deanne Turner, and on LinkedIn as well.
Very good. Do you have a closing challenge for our viewers?
Yes. Go do something remarkable.
Amen. Deanne, thank you for being with us. Thank you for visiting us here on Main Street.
Yes, Deanne, thank you so much. It was our pleasure to have you here.
Well, it's been completely my pleasure. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for joining us this week on Main Street. Be sure to join us next week for another great episode.
We hope that Main Street has been a blessing to you today. Please feel free to contact the following to learn more about the topics discussed on today's show. WLMB would like to thank all the faithful supporters of WLMB that make this program possible. Main Street is a production of WLMB-TV 40 in Toledo. All rights reserved.